Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about the historic uh, election that took place on the 4th of November for the 111th position of mayor of New York City was won by uh, Assemblyman Zorhan Mamdani. And I'll talk a little bit about his speech and this historic win. He becomes the youngest mayor in New York City history, as well as the first South Asian, and as well as the first Muslim um, American. When I say Muslim American, some people say American Muslim. I say Muslim American because to me, American Muslim, the other way around, it means something else, from a non immigrant background. But he is from an immigrant background. So, hey, Lisa, what's going on? Let's talk about it, guys. The speech. The speech was criticized by many. I felt it was conciliatory. Conciliatory. It He basically said to Andrew Cuomo that he hopes Andrew Cuomo enjoys a private life, doing whatever he's doing. He didn't address Eric Adams, but he addressed Andrew Cuomo. But then, and he called out to those who voted for him as well as those who did not, to try and bring the city together. He also talked about uh, Donald Trump. He said, Donald Trump, if you're listening, which I know you are, turn the volume up. So basically, that was a call to um, challenge Donald Trump. So the next 4 years or the next 3 years that Trump is president and Zorhan is mayor, Zorhan is making it there for 4 years, and Trump is going to be president for 3 more years. This should be very interesting between the president of the United States and the mayor of America's biggest city. And even more interesting because Trump is from here. You know what I mean? This is his hometown. So the way this plays out is going to be very interesting because not only because of that, because Mamdani is everything Trump is not. You know what I mean? He's charismatic. He's well spoken. He's educated. He's an immigrant. He's a Muslim. He is compassionate. He cares about poor people. He cares about the disenfranchised. He spoke in a speech about a woman that he met on the BBX 33 bus, where she said, she used to love New York City, but now she just lives here. He spoke about uh, childcare and his plans on how to fix that. Basically the same stuff he spoke about in the campaign. He spoke about Yemeni bodega owners and people from Uzbekistan and Trinidadian nurses and Kenyan aunties and Ethiopian aunties, and he emphasized aunties. The whole thing we spoke about in the other video. We mentioned these other ethnicities that they never really get spoken about in New York City. As he said, it's a city built by immigrants, founded by immigrants. New York has always been a multicultural city since its founding in 1620. By the Dutch. They bought the island of Manhattan for $25 and some beads from the local Native Americans. It was a port city, so it was always multicultural, and the Dutch were liberal by comparison to other European colonists. So New York has always had that character. People are acting shocked because oh, he's so different than other Americans. How dare they, right? People that are bigoted. Um, but one contention I have with that: Yemeni store owners are not Yemeni bodega owners, Zoran. If It's only a bodega in New York City if it's owned by a Hispanic person. If it's not owned by a Hispanic person, it's not a bodega, it's a deli or a corner store. You know, the way we differentiate in New York is if it's a poppy store, the bacon is pork bacon, and if it's an Aki store and it's owned by a Muslim, it's turkey bacon. So there's no such thing as a Yemeni bodega owner. All bodega owners are uh, Dominican or Puerto Rican. But other than that, it was cool that he named those specific ethnicities. He thanked his mother and his father. He thanked all the people that worked in his campaign. For his campaign tirelessly. It was a really long speech. On a serious note, though, another thing I have an issue with is him saying that there is no problem that government, he said in the speech, there's no problem government can't solve or that the government won't listen to. It's fine that the government listens to you, but the idea that we need to depend on the federal, the federal, or in this case, the city government to solve our problems is antithetical to what most people want. I don't think most people want more government in their lives. They want to be able and have the freedom to do with their lives what they wish. They don't want the government to be super oppressive. Now, but that's a minor thing, in my opinion. The kind of struck me as the opposite of something that Ronald Reagan said in his inauguration speech in 1980, where Ronald Reagan said, government can't fix the problem. Government is the problem. You know what I mean? So it's kind of obviously Zorhan's a democratic socialist and Ronald Reagan's a conservative, so they would have different philosophies. But to me, I think what makes America great is the people doing for themselves and having the freedom to do for themselves without the government being on their back. A nanny state where the government does everything is kind of oppressive and kind of counterproductive, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like Cuba or Venezuela, type stuff. And, we don't need to go there. Lisa says government can fix the problem and make the problem. Yeah, that's true. They can. I believe in a social safety net, Lisa. I'm not a complete libertarian or an extreme conservative where I say that the government programs should be eliminated altogether. But I think the language, I think it was a poor choice of words. That him saying that there is no problem that the government can't fix. I mean, they're already accusing him of being a communist. You don't want to put that out there and say something that the media will misconstrue as being okay, he is clearly a communist, because to them it's like the Marxist mantra, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, which was Karl Marx's, the founder of communism, slogan. You don't want to veer into that territory, and you can see how that would be taken as a. But Lisa's absolutely correct, though. A mixed economy of government ownership and private enterprise is necessary, because too much private enterprise leads to, laissez-faire capitalism, which is a French word, which means hands off. Hands off capitalism leads to Somalia, but too much government leads to Venezuela and Cuba. And we don't want either one. We don't want Somalia, and we don't want Venezuela or Cuba either. We basically want a mix of private goods and services and public goods and services. To me, my opinion, I veer more towards the public sector, because the public sector is open to everybody, whereas the private sector is only open to you if you have money. you know what I mean? Like, and basically that's the change. Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with his philosophy. I'm just saying he could have communicated it better. what's basically been the problem with New York City since, like Lisa pointed out. I don't know if Lisa said this publicly in a video, but she said it to me privately, and I stopped and thought. Since Michael Bloomberg, uh, since Michael Bloomberg became the mayor of New York City in the 2000s, we've had basically a Somalia type situation, in the sense that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. And um, that has caused uh, a tremendous problem. Lisa saying, well, in NYC's case for housing, absolutely. Like I said, I veer more towards the public side, but he could have expressed it in a different way. But this is how he is. He's sort of like a Democratic Trump. You know what I mean? Because both these guys, both Trump and Zorhan, even though they are polar opposites in their political philosophies, they're kind of actually similar in the sense that neither one is a seasoned politician. Neither one is coy. Both are very blunt and very direct, and they both say what they feel. You know what I mean? They talk like normal people. You know what I mean? They don't talk like politicians, and that's going to get him in hot water like it's gotten Trump in hot water with the opposite side. And because neither one is Barack Obama. Neither one is Barack Obama. The beauty of Barack Obama uh, was that Barack Obama had the ability to convey his thoughts in such a way that was tactful. But what happened after him is that other people tried to be him and they don't succeed after him. You know what I mean? Like Kamala Harris, a perfect example. Uh, you listen to a Kamala Harris interview and you never knew what the hell the lady was trying to say. You know what I mean? She would say a million things without saying anything at all. Obama would do something similar, but with Obama, he was such a great speaker that even if you didn't understand what he just said, you're like, oh shit, I feel inspired. Like I don't know what that guy just said, but you know, I feel it. You know what I mean? Like, but Zorhan is not him, and Trump is definitely not him. They both. Oh yeah, he's more articulate than Trump, but I'm just saying he gets himself in hot water because there are certain things he says that he'll get himself in hot water. He's better than Eric Adams. Eric Adams is perhaps the worst spoken politician that I've ever come across in my years of studying politics, worse than Trump. You know what I mean? Like, but Zorhan is more tactful. But here's another thing I think is a good comparison between Zorhan and Trump, and why Zorhan is the left wing version of Trump in some ways. And this is nothing against him. He much like Trump, he promises things that cannot be done. You know what I mean? They sound great on paper, but they cannot be done. And I think that his voter base doesn't fully grasp that. You know what I mean? Some of the things are not feasible. You know what I mean? They sound great on paper, but they're not, in my opinion. I feel like they just can't be accomplished. You know what I mean? Like free bus rides. I mean, it would be a great idea. Like Lisa said before, it worked during COVID, but it's going to be an uphill battle. He's going to have to deal with the state. You know what I mean? Um, and I believe they're going to fight him at every turn. So I feel like free bus rides and the free bus ride mantra is sort of like the left wing version of build a wall. Is the Democratic version of build a wall. Yeah, that's what the people want, the voter base wants, but can it be done? Is it practical? You know what I mean? No. you know, you know what I mean? It, it's not. You know what I mean? It was done during COVID for a specific reason because now he was on David Pakman and David Pakman addressed this issue and he brought up on David Pakman's show that Mayor Bloomberg was building a housing development and Mayor Bloomberg circumvented the state and was able to get the funds through the city and that's what he plans to do with the free bus rides. We'll see. What I think is going to happen is that the city council will gridlock him on this. Because when it comes to massive spending projects, with Mayor Bloomberg, of course, because that appeases the rich. So, of course, city council is going to let him do that and go around Albany and do that. But with something that benefits us, the populace, they're not going to do that. Because overall, whether Democrat or Republican, most people in elected office and city council and these legislative branches, they want to benefit the rich. They don't want to benefit the ordinary person. You know what I mean? So what Mayor Bloomberg went around and did and circumvented this Albany and was able to use New York City funds to do, they're cool with that. But something like this, I don't think is feasible. That's just me. I could be wrong. I hope I am. You know what I mean. But now and state-owned. I mean, state-owned, city-owned grocery stores is another one. Now, I never actually heard him say that he was gonna have government-owned grocery stores. But if that is a plan, um, I can't see how that would work. You know what I mean? It's never been done. I don't think it's practical. I mean, a business like a grocery store, the point of it is to generate profit. And maybe I'm wrong again. Maybe there's a way to do it that is good. But and then you have something from the state that is state owned, is going to be in direct competition with private enterprise, and it's going to hurt businesses and hurt people that are employed by, said private enterprise supermarket. So I think that's a pipe dream, even though it would be cool, I guess. You know what I mean? Something to try out, where government could regulate prices so that they don't become exorbitant, like they are, in terms of groceries. But, I don't see that happening. And another thing is he addressed the Jewish community, which is an issue with him. He assured them that he's going to tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism. The quote is, I assure Jewish New Yorkers that we will tackle the scourge of the scourge of anti-Semitism, which was, like I said, an issue with him because of the language, the incendiary type coded language that many in the Jewish community interpreted to mean, to be anti-Semitic. And he also addressed the Muslim community. He says that the Muslim New Yorkers will finally get recognition, not just in the five boroughs, but in the halls of power. Again, something that I know what he meant. That Muslim New Yorkers will get representation, but with the wording, you know, could have been worded a little bit differently. But I know what he meant. He meant just that Muslim New Yorkers have been unrepresented in New York City forever, and Muslims have been a part of New York City forever, and never politicians don't really reach out to Muslims, go to mosques and reach out to Muslims on the broader level in the city, whereas now they will. But saying that, oh, now we're in the halls of power is like signaling to an Islamophobe. Okay, you know, we're gonna be hearing the Muslim call to prayer on the train. You don't really want to do that, but they're gonna take it like that. In other words, don't let them give you so much rope that you can hang yourself with. They're already saying this about you. You don't want to. Maybe he feels like fuck it. You know what I mean? Like, uh, they're gonna say it about me anyway, so I might as well just roll with it. I don't know. But I'm glad he did that because some of the old stuff that he was saying, I don't know if he meant it. You know what I mean? I don't know if he really was anti-Semitic. I don't know him personally. You know what I mean? But despite that, he still got like 35% of the vote from Jewish New Yorkers. You know what I mean? Let's go into, Lisa sent me this, a breakdown of the demographics of people that voted for Zoran Mamdani. The number one issue, according to New Yorkers on this, was cost of living. 55% of New Yorkers voted on this issue, said that this is why they voted. Cost of living. Crime came in second, and immigration came in first. Immigration is not such an issue for New Yorkers because we're loving and accepting of immigrants. We're not one of those xenophobic cities. And surprisingly enough, 87% of New Yorkers who voted for Zohar Mandani consider themselves okay with being a democratic socialist. 9% was okay with calling themselves MAGA. Interesting. Which one of the five candidates you think will bring about change? And 78% said Zohar Mamdani. So 78% of New Yorkers believe that Zohar Mamdani will bring about change in New York. Now, okay, religion. Like I said, 32%, I said 35, but I'm looking at the numbers right now that Lisa sent me. 32% of New Yorkers who voted for him were Jewish New Yorkers. 33 were Catholics. 43 were Protestants and, Christians, right? 71% were other. Now, I think, I don't know, but I think the other was probably Muslims. A lot of Muslims, and then a lot of secular people that are not religious. 76% voted for him that were not religious. 77% of the people that voted for Zohan Mandani said that their reason was to oppose Donald Trump. So obviously, this is blue MAGA. This is the dream that the Democrats, ever since 2016, and Lisa, you can back me up on this because Lisa is like me, a staunch Democrat. We've had a dream. We're like Martin Luther King, but our dream is a little bit different. That we would have somebody that was our Trump, somebody that was equal to the power of Trump, equal to his aura, but on our side. You know what I mean? Then we were looking and we couldn't really find that person. You know what I mean? Because everybody we had was weak. Like the Democrats were slow. Hey Nick, what's going on, man? The Democrats were slow to catch up. Uh, on the fact that after 2016, politics changed. You know, we're in a different ball game now. You know, we're no longer playing basketball, we're playing football now. You know, and we're over there still, the Democrats were over there still playing basketball. You know what I mean? And Republicans had already switched to football. And we didn't catch it. You know what I mean? Like we're still playing by the old rules and they're playing by the new rules. you know what I mean? And okay, by gender, you have men 18 to 29, 67% voted for him. Men 34 to 44, which is me, 67% voted for him. Men 45 to 64, 45%. Women 18 to 29. So he had a large portion of women, 84%. A large portion of women 18 to 29. Younger women 34 to 44, which is like Lisa's demographic, 65%. 43% women from uh, women 45 to 64, and 65 and older, 36%. Interesting though, men and women above 65, seniors, I'm doing good, Nick. Seniors voted for him 64. I mean, up in the 60th percent, you know, up in the 36th percentile, higher than Cuomo. So you would think older people tend to go with the more established candidates, and of course, Cuomo got the lesser of the women vote because he fucked himself when it came to the women, because he's. I mean, look what he was guilty of. Now, the anti-Mamdani crowd, because much like, again, we're going back to the comparisons, much like Trump, at least in 2016, less so in 2020 and 2024. But when Trump first appeared on the political scene in 2015-16, the Republican Party was split. There was the old school Republicans, they were never Trumpers, right? And then there was the MAGA people. And it was like this on the Democratic side with Mamdani. You had some people, I had people on my page that hardcore Democrats, they did not go for Mamdani. They were anti-Mamdani, like never Mamdani, right? And and you know, they lost out because the alternative was Andrew Cuomo. You know what I mean? Like Andrew Cuomo was the alternative, and Andrew Cuomo sucks. You know what I mean? So I mean, he had a really low voter turnout for him. It wasn't even close, the race. Overall, 50.4% for Mamdani, 41.6% for Cuomo, and 7.1% for Curtis Sweela. So the Republican Party is a non-factor in the city of New York. Like Curtis Sweela couldn't even crack 20%. That's how bad he was. But I give him credit though because he ran and he didn't give up. You know what I mean? He didn't drop out. He was pressured to by conservatives. He was very pressured to by conservatives in the Democratic Party and by conservatives, Republicans who drop out. And he never did. You know what I mean? He stood his ground. And he conceded. He conceded first. The first concession speech I heard was from Curtis Sweela, and then I heard it from Andrew Cuomo. But yeah, this is it. We're in a new era in Democratic politics, I believe. We talked about before, Lisa and I did, the civil war in the Democratic Party, just like there was a civil war in the Republican Party, because the younger people are different on both sides of the aisle. The things that the boogeymen that old school boomer and Gen X conservatives and liberals used to put up against the younger people, they no longer fall for on both sides of the aisle. I think Republicans have gone further to the right and Democrats have gone further to the left in both their respective parties. And some would argue that's a good thing. Some would argue that's a terrible thing. You know what I mean? It's all perspective. We see the controversy with the young Republicans in the group chat. They've gone to the far further right than even Trump. You know what I mean? And we see this because we're no longer scared by the boogeymen of fascism and communism because and socialism because we didn't live that. You know what I mean? Many of the people that voted for Mamdani or even those that voted for Trump and voted for further right leaning Republicans, you know, they weren't around during World War II. They weren't around during the Cold War. So those sort of boogeymen that boomers, both liberal and conservative, threw at their children and grandchildren, they're no longer scared of anymore. You know what I mean? And they see that the old way wasn't working on both sides. They saw that politicians were getting nowhere, trying to capitulate and trying to appease and being the weak ones and trying to reach across the aisle. Again, look at this election as a city version of the 2008 presidential election, where you had a guy like John McCain. He basically played the role of Andrew Cuomo in this, where McCain was all types of trying to reach across the aisle, had Joe Lieberman as his partner, not his running mate, but his like Lieberman, a Democrat, endorsed him. And it's like Republicans at that time were like, no, this is not what we want. And Democrats were kind of like that too, like with Cuomo. They're like, no, we don't want you to capitulate and we don't want you to be a moderate. This Mamdani election, much like the Trump election, is a rejection of moderation. Like people aren't going for that your parents' political shit anymore. You know, you're not going to scare somebody by throwing socialist at them if you're on the right, and you're not going to scare somebody. I mean, if they're on the left and you're on the right, you say, oh, he's a socialist. And people, you know, this sort of red baiting thing. They're like, oh, we don't want communism, you know, because of the Cold War. Or vice versa on the left. I don't think people on the right are scared of being called a fascist anymore or racist anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, gloves off now. Now we're playing a different sort of politics. And some would argue that's a dangerous thing. Some would argue that these sort of politicians that we see on the left and the right that are Mr. Fix-It type guys, that cults of personality, as Nick would uh, identify as CM Punk's theme song. These cults of personality that we're seeing that like are like Mamdani, you know, that they aren't good for society. That they've come about as a reaction to the failures of the Great Recession, where both parties got blamed. The establishment of both parties got blamed for the Great Recession. And since that time, things have changed. Things have drastically changed with both parties. So we're seeing a different kind of politics. That's to me what it represents. Deeper than um, uh, a victim. Uh, Deeper than just him being a Muslim, right? Forget all that xenophobic BS. Oh, he's a Muslim and scare tactics and all that. You know what I mean? Like down to brass ideas, we're seeing a rougher, deeper approach, to politics than used to be. Because, like, who can remember the 2004 election, the presidential election? 2004, like, you sat there and you listened to John Kerry, you listened to George W. Bush, and it was like there was really no difference between either one. You know what I mean? One had an R in one of his name, and the other had a D in front of his name, and it was like these two guys could be the same motherfucking guy. you know, but I think uh, both parties have moved beyond that. You know what I mean? But what does it mean for independence? People that are independent. You know what I mean? People that don't think in terms of partisanship. This guy here said, Trump, please hurry up and evict Mamdani. Of course, Lisa supports Mamdani. You know what I mean? So you have different people, with this visceral reaction. And you didn't used to see that when it came to politics. You used to see, okay, yeah, I'm a Democrat, I support Democrats. I'm a Republican, I support Republicans. But it wasn't this sort of hatred of a candidate or visceral love of a candidate that you didn't see before. You know what I mean? But as far as evicting him, I mean, he was democratically elected. There's nothing really anybody can do about it. That's the way that democracy works. And hopefully he will do a good job. Hopefully he will represent my city, you know, right. And if he doesn't, then the people will evict him. Trump can't do anything to evict him. This is a democracy. You know what I mean? He can't throw the mayor of New York City out. This is the way it is, and the people decide. That's the beauty of our Constitution. That's the beauty of our form of government, that we are democratic. And, that he's probably just going to say he's a Muslim socialist, right? And, he's a democratic socialist, a Muslim socialist, and he's a Muslim, but his religion is not his, like, Mamdani's barely a Muslim. I mean, like, really, like, he supports LGBT uh, representation. He's secular. His last campaign stop was a gay club. Like, he's not the Ayatollah Khomeini. He's not he's not a Salafist in Saudi Arabia. You know what I mean? Like, if you guys are wrestling fans, shit, you should be more upset about Triple H and TKO and Nick Khan doing business with the people that you supposedly hate, the radical Muslims, because they're the ones doing business with the radical Muslims. They're the ones capitulating to radical Muslim agenda, not Mamdani. You know what I mean? Uh, it's funny when a lot of these MAGA types, these MAGA, conservative types, come and say, "Oh well, we gotta get rid of uh, Islamism, right? Political Islam, like jihadist philosophy," but perfectly okay with people that they support, like Triple H, who's basically in the administration, right? And Donald Trump doing business with Qatar, doing business with Saudi Arabia, these countries that have that are actually practicing the thing that you say that you're against, you know, which is the Salafi school of Islam, the strict interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah. I mean, you say you're against that, and you have a right to be against it. You should be against it because it's terrible. You know what I mean? But you're perfectly all right and okay with people on your side doing business with these individuals and publicly sanctioning them and funding them. But Mamdani, who is a liberal Muslim, that you're against, right? He's not. He's fucking. His wife. At his speech, right? And every time you see her, is she in a burqa? Is she in a abaya? Is she in a hijab? Is she even in a hijab? Is she in a niqab? Is her face all covered up? No. You know what I mean? But you think that it's through politics that radical Islam is going to take over the West and America. That's what you think. People, not anybody here on this board, this forum, but that's not the way it's going to be. You know what I mean? Then they're not going to elect a radical Muslim into power. But the way they're going to do it is the way they've been doing it. Is Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all the Gulf countries that are ultra conservative Muslim countries. They're going to continue to influence America and the West through business. You know what I mean? Having WrestleMania 43 in Saudi Arabia, you should be more upset about that than Mamdani, because that is that is an influence. That is a way that this radical school of Islam, this radical jihadist school of Islam, that's Saudi Arabia, that's our ally, that's been our ally since the 30s, is influencing the United States, not the way you're thinking. But oh no, you don't care about that because all the rich people love Qatar, all the rich people love Dubai, all the rich people love Riyadh. You know what I mean? But radical Islam, right? But these are the radical Muslim countries. So the radical Muslim countries we don't like, those are the bad radical Muslim countries, but the good radical Muslim countries we do like that makes no sense. Either you're against radical Islam or you're for it. I mean, you can't back Saudi Arabia and back Qatar and back the UAE and then say, I'm against radical Islam. These are radical Islam. Like the hijackers, the 19 hijackers, most of them from Saudi Arabia. They're not like Zoran Mamdani. Zoran Mamdani is a liberal, progressive Muslim. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know if he prays. I don't even know if he, fast on Ramadan. I doubt it. Like, as he was campaigning, he was in a Hindu. His mom is a Hindu. That's another thing. His mother is Hindu. Like, he's not even entirely all the way Muslim, right? Because before, when he was campaigning, he was in a Hindu temple. Would a radical Muslim really be in a Hindu temple doing anything other than trying to destroy it like they did when they took over India in both the 7th century with Muhammad ibn Qasim and the 15th century with Babur and the Mughals? No. They wouldn't. Would they acknowledge Diwali? No, they wouldn't. You know what I mean? Some Muslims wouldn't even wish a person a Merry Christmas. They're that religious and orthodox. So spare me that BS because, again, it's just like the red baiting. You go, you're against communists, right? You say, oh, communism, that's evil, right? Right? They should be shunned. Economic sanctions on countries like Cuba for decades, basically strangling Cuba's economy and crippling Cuba for being communist. But at the same time, palling around and doing business with China and overlooking China's violation of human rights against its own citizens. So, and I understand people are going to say, "Oh, it's politics," but you make a stance. You say that communism is evil. You say that socialism is evil. You say that Islam is evil. Right? They're politicians. They have to capitulate to some degree. You're not a politician. You're a person. You could, on principle, oppose it. But if you support it, you support politicians that capitulate, then you yourself are complicit in it. You know, I said this before about racism. Years ago, I made a video, and this is my old channel. Years ago, I made a video. This is when they were talking about the Dominican Republic. They were talking about discrimination against Haitians in the Dominican Republic. And I said that a lot of people say, a lot of Hispanics, I'm not racist, I have black friends, and a lot of white people say that too. But saying that is nothing if you're giving your support to a country that is committing genocide. You know what I mean? So just paying lip service to it, saying you hate communism, saying you hate Islamic fundamentalism, saying you hate socialism, but being perfectly, you're willing to economically strangle certain countries that practice these ideologies while supporting others because the others are more powerful on the political stage. China is communist, but it's more powerful than Cuba, that is also communist. Um, Saudi Arabia is Islamic fundamentalist, but they're more powerful than, say, Sudan, that is also Islamic fundamentalist, right? That's hypocritical. You know, saying you're against um, religion and politics, but supporting a state like the state of Israel. Now we're getting into it. That is basically a state that gives preferential treatment of one religion and ethnic group over another. Now there's reasons for it, historical reasons that have to do with the discrimination against Jewish people in Eastern Europe, not in the Middle East. You know, but you can't say you're against religion and government when you support these countries that openly involve religion and government. You know, so some religions are good and others aren't. It makes no sense. But Mamdani is not going to impose Sharia law on the United States. Mamdani is not going to impose outright Stalinist, Marxist, Leninist communism on New York City. You know what I mean? Like, he may do some socialistic things, you know, but there's already socialism in the government. You know, I mean, we already exist in a mixed economy. We don't exist in a laissez-faire capitalist society like in the 1920s, and thank God we don't. You know what I mean? The Ludlow massacre, the Memorial Day massacre, all these massacres that occurred in the 1920s and 30s, rejecting. Yeah, Lisa's right. They said the same thing with Obama, rejecting uh, laissez-faire capitalism. Like, do you really want to exist in a world without labor unions? Do you really want to exist in a world without child labor laws? Do you really want to exist in a world without the, you know, hours on work restrictions? You know, the 9 to 5 hour workday. These are the things that were brought to you by democratic socialists, right? By labor unionists that fought to bring these things to you. You don't want to exist in a world, at least I don't, of unregulated capitalism, because that world, a country like that already exists, and that country that already exists like that is Somalia. You know what I mean? Like, so if you want to exist in a country without government at all, where government is completely hands off, you're welcome. Mogadishu is right around the corner. You know, you know what I mean? In anarchist society, I don't. I like that the government serves as an arbitrator between ruthless capitalists and the people, because capitalists are are invested in their bottom line. You know what I mean? They want to make profit. That's the point of capitalism. You set up a business to generate profit, and they'll do anything. Some capitalists are um, are vicious. You ever play the game Monopoly? That's basically capitalism. That's what capitalism is, right? And not to say that communism is any better, because extreme communism is even worse with the government because of the inefficiency, the lack of incentive. I'm not saying that is a good way either. Like, that's been tried and that's failed every single time as well. But you need to have a balance between private ownership and public ownership. Too much private ownership, the poor get left out. You know what I mean? Like, again, what existed in the early industrial age, where you had kids as young as 5 working in factories and nobody was protecting them. Is that what we want to go back to? You know, that sort of thing that libertarians, that they read Ayn Rand, right? The Fountainhead, and they think that's the Bible. You know what I mean? That society can function on that level. You know, both libertarianism, which is far right conservatism, and communism are both fantasies. Society doesn't function in either way capacity well like that. Extreme selfishness, Ayn Rand saying selfishness is a virtue. I mean, what kind of world is that? You know, and extreme altruism like communism, society doesn't work like that either, because people are selfish naturally. And in order for people to get people to invest in the democratic ownership of the means of production, the collective ownership of the means of production, government has to seize the means of production, and that leads to tyranny. So we don't want tyranny and we don't want chaos. So we have to have a combination of both. And that's what I support, a moderate position. Some government ownership, some private ownership, more towards the public ownership, because, again, when it's too private, the economically disadvantaged get left out, unfortunately. You got to pay to play. Now, I understand that there is, because I used to be a libertarian. This is how I'm telling you that I believed at one time in libertarianism. When I was a young, like 15, 16, 17, I read Ayn Rand. I read, I believed in objectivism, her philosophy. I read God and Man at Yale by William F. Buckley. My first election that I ever voted for was George W. Bush in 2000. That I ever voted was 2004. You know what I mean? So at one time, I believed in that. You know what I mean? But when you get older, you realize, hey, that philosophy sucks. You know what I mean? Because it leaves a lot of people, disadvantaged, and it leaves a lot of people out in the cold. It disproportionately affects people of color because of the way the system is set up. You know what I mean? It's a nice philosophy to believe in. You know what I mean? That, We don't need anybody else. We don't need the government. We don't need handouts. We pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. But as Barack Obama said, what if we don't even have boots to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps? What are we going to do then? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Self-reliance, self-sufficiency. I didn't need anybody's help. I did it all by myself, all by myself. But again, does anybody really get anywhere in life all by themselves on completely their own merit, or are we a society that functions on a collective level? You know what I mean? Like, there is nepotism everywhere around the world. There is help. There is connections. My mom is often fond of saying it's not what you know, but it's who you know. You know what I mean? There's networking. This sort of stuff, people have help in everything they do. I guarantee you, the things that anybody did, they didn't get it all by themselves. You know what I'm saying? They got it through their grit and hard work. Remember in 2012, one of the biggest controversies in the Obama Romney campaign was Obama saying, "You didn't build this." You know what I mean? Like, basically saying that, the people that build these productive businesses, they had help, right? And it's true. Everybody has help. Everybody needs help. You know what I mean? Now, when it becomes an issue of dependency on public assistance, or dependency on the dole, as it were, then it becomes an issue. Then it's bad. But in moderation, like anything else, it can be a good thing. Government assistance, government help, a government to serve as an arbiter between the people and the private sector. Because how can we effectively say that people are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when I can't pursue happiness because I'm economically disadvantaged? So, what is the big issue in the government stepping on a moderate level again and helping individuals, giving them a helping hand so they're able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps? So it's a hand up and not a handout. You know what I mean? So that's just the way I see it, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button as soon as my next video is coming out. Love you guys. Peace.